2, 1. Okay, we are live, and I'm going to introduce Ken Ward, who is the reluctant radical, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House.
Hey,
we're
thanks
thrilled
for
to have
having me.
you
I'm really looking forward to this.
I know, it's great. It's going to be great. We're going to build an audience. I think we're starting, and hello.
Hey.
So you are in Oregon now, which is a state near and dear to my heart, as my brother and his whole family live there. And I really love the state, but I know you were in New Jersey also. And so you really are, you get around there, Ken, huh?
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I am Sandy Shellis. This is Environmental Coffee House. Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to start out, I'm going to read you an interesting paragraph that Ken wrote quite a while ago, but it's very telling, and we're going to go full circle tonight, okay? So this begins with, and it's kind of prophetic, to have a shot at advancing a functional global solution, U.S. environmentalists must take 3 quick actions. Acknowledge that the cataclysm is probable, withdraw from what we are doing now, and focus all our resources and energies in one cooperative and desperate effort to win a sea of change in American social and political view. If we think in terms of joint strategic action within a 3-year time frame, and this was 2007, the realm of what is possible is significantly expanded beyond our present aims. U.S. environmentalists have sufficient resources, for example, to use the 2008 presidential race to completely rewrite the U.S. climate narrative. We cannot do so, however, if our agenda is dictated by what is winnable this year in Congress. And Ken, have we done that?
We have obviously failed to do that.
Question. Loaded question, huh?
Yeah.
So why don't we start? Because that was pretty good. And you had a really great start. And I'd like to hear about you. I'd like to hear your background and how you became Ken, the activist.
Well, I was a professional staff person in public interest organizations and environmental organizations. I actually dropped out of college to start doing that. I went to Hampshire College in Western Massachusetts. And then I worked in a number of places, but for many years in the state PIRG network, so NYPIRG in New York or MassPIRG in Massachusetts. I was the executive director of the New Jersey Public Interest Research Group for nearly 20 years. And I worked for Greenpeace for a while as well. And then, and including working on climate change. I mean, I started working on climate change. I know this pretty well because I had to put together a history for my lawyers. They're like, how long did you work on energy policy in general, and when did you start working on climate change? The first thing I did on energy policy was in 1977. I wrote a piece of legislation for the Massachusetts legislature that would have tied vehicle efficiency ratings to your annual registration fee. So that if you were driving I think it was a Delta 88 was the worst car at the time, you would have had to pay big boats, right? Terribly inefficient. If you had one of them, you would have had those. Like, I think $250, and if you had a VW, you would have gotten a rebate. So I've been working on this stuff for a very long time.
Yes, I would say my whole older life after high school.
And then I took a leave of absence from being a professional staff person in 2000 because I became an at-home dad for about 3 years full time. Nice. And then as I was starting to go back to think about work, I had the opportunity to research and do some reading in a way that if you're working full time, you just don't have the time to do. And that's when I went back and I knew that climate change was what I wanted to work on, but I had the time to go actually read a lot of work, including, and then I ran across, or I read Jim Hanson's, Dr. James Hanson's Slippery Slope. which was the first, document that essentially said, "Hey, we're looking at catastrophic, potentially unsurvivable climate change here." And that, as with a lot of people, when you're first confronted with that, most people think of some way to not to think about it, and then for some reason, some percentage of us can't do that. And so for me, that kind of fundamentally changed things, because I thought, well, we have to have a strategy that will fit with what at least Hansen and I consider them to be the conservative climate scientists are saying. And then that's how I got to the thing you're reading, was I compared to what we were doing with what's necessary in terms of the geophysical realities, and they just didn't match up. And so that's what they've been with, increasingly with others now, but for struggling with for about 15 years now, is to try to at least get a good fight.
Yes, a good fight. Well, that good fight then resulted in a lot of craziness for you, but everybody knows you as the guy, the valve turner. But before we get into that, I would like a little background on when you were writing and when you first discovered and started reading, when you discovered Hansen. How did that feel for you? What was it? An epiphany? What was it like to draw you to be like this?
It was I've been an environmentalist since I was in high school, so the concept of what we're doing to the earth was no surprise. A lot of people, when they come to this, they're like, well, wait a minute, we could actually destroy the conditions that make life for us and other ecosystems possible. But I knew that was already threatened. The thing about reading Hansen was that it was going to be much quicker than we thought. And of course, it's far quicker even than that. I mean, what Hansen was thinking and what we were concerned about 10 years ago was change in the hundreds, measured in the hundreds of years, and now we're down to decades or years. So things that I thought we would be aiming for, 100 years from now in terms of sort of strategic thinking, if that's even possible, are now happening, or things that would have been within my son or his children, if he has them's lifetime, are now happening within our own lifespans, which is really extraordinary. And I think, like lots of people, I just got really incredibly depressed by that, because the sheer scale of what we would have to do in the time frame available to us, even then, it was daunting. And then for me, it got more depressing when I started to try to talk to friends and other folks who are, in essence, sitting on our resources, people who are running our major organizations, which are spending, depending on how you count it, probably $1 billion a year is spent all told on climate change right now. Just on climate, not even counting other things. That's a staggering amount of resources. We could be doing a lot with that, and we could have been doing a lot for the last decade. So trying to engage a conversation with our leaders of our major organizations didn't go anywhere because they didn't want to talk about it, and that was profoundly depressing.
Why? Why did they not want to talk about this? And it's interesting because I've been researching these big NGOs as well.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time obviously thinking about it. I'm in a somewhat unique situation. Not only do I work in those organizations, but I co-founded something called Green Corps, which is the only school for environmental organizers in the country. And between Green Corps, between the state PERGs, which are really a training ground for a lot of leaders, and also Greenpeace, I know a lot of people. In fact, I hired and trained a lot of people who are in senior leadership positions. So it wasn't some abstract NGO. It was like, my friends are doing this. And so I have lots of vantage point to consider the question. And I think it comes down to two things really. At the institutional level, well, maybe three. There's sort of institutional and organizational level, which is that it's not in the institution, it's not in our organization's interests, the corporate interests, to try to actually address the problem. not because they don't want the problem to be addressed, but merely because it doesn't fit into how the organizations function. It's very risky to do any of the things. I mean, in the paper you were reading from, the thing I have been somewhere in there, or maybe it was a different paper, but I wrote a little thing saying, so what should we do? Well, I said, well, realistically, if we really want to address this, we really want to shift what we're doing, I think we should have a press conference on the steps of the Capitol with the heads of the top 20 environmental organizations in the country saying, we apologize. For 15 years now, we've been saying we can address this if you just change your light bulbs. We were wrong. This is totally a different level of problem. We do not think this is addressable in Congress or in elite level Congress. It's certainly not addressable by giving awards to BP, let's say, or hanging out with Shell. We are going to close down our offices, except for a small lobbying office, and we're going to go into the heartland of the nation. We're going to go where people are, and we're going to try to campaign for this in the places on the ground where people are, because we need to have the fight there. We're not going to solve the problem by elites in private negotiations, agreeing to do something because it's the reasonable thing to do. It's not going to happen. This is going to be a big, terrible, probably losing political battle, but that's how we need to run it. So that doesn't really fit with, how NRDC is structured, or even how the Sierra Club is structured. It's just a huge challenge. So that's one level. Huge. And I think the other level is just at the personal level, lots of people are just in denial. I mean, it's just the way humans are configured. Even environmentalism, it turns out, isn't sufficient to overcome denial. And I've thought a little bit I actually did quite a research into why would it be that only certain numbers of people do react with, terror or the urgency to do something. I think there's some good arguments. There's one view of human intelligence that it comes in a variety of different kinds, and that one of those kinds of intelligence, the main one we think of is kind of like Greek rational intelligence, but that's only one. There's a variety of ways you can be smart, and everybody's smart in some way. You just have to figure out what it is. I think, and one of those ways of being smart is existential intelligence. Is often the kinds of people who tend towards spiritual questions or answers, and they may be religious, but they don't have to be. But I think that's what climate freakout people are. I think climate freakout people are ones who are presented with the concept that the world as we know it could be ending now, and they go, like me, we have to do something.
I'm one of them.
You're
one of them. Oh, I'm down that rabbit hole, let me tell you.
But I think most people aren't. Even environmentalists aren't. They just presented with that information. They'll go like, okay, that's a problem. Let's go on with our lives. And the combination of those two things, organizational and institutional barriers to change, individuals who are not actually freaked out, makes it possible for our own institution to proceed along as it's been doing for decades now, without being willing to take risky steps. It's not like they're not working on it. Everybody's working on it, but they're only doing it. Sorry.
Okay. No, it's all right. I don't want to repeat
some of the stuff I've thought about so long, I could just talk a long time, so I'll try not to do that.
It's almost in the lines of the Bright Lines analysis that I read of yours, that I think there's a possibility that you could update this. Could you update this?
I was thinking
the three
about it.
barriers addressed in the analysis. I don't know if anybody knows it, but I can put some of this stuff up afterwards. But it's very compelling, because a lot of people that I am interacting with are down the rabbit hole. But there are so many, and it's frightening, and it is denial. I've been dealing with it on some of my streams and writing a theory about how it's really not depression, it's grief. It's a grief we feel. We're reading every week about mass die-offs, where it's a lot of stuff. Yeah. Read it every day. So where you are now, how do you feel we can proceed about, informing people besides, we're going to get to your activism, but just the existential part? Let's go there.
Well, at a personal level, it's more comfortable because there's more people out there. I mean, there are some people out there. 15 years ago, I was quite lonely. And when I was writing the Bright Lines papers, the only people I was really talking to that I felt could have a comfortable conversation with about this was Bill McKibben and Ross Gelbspan, who was, I spent a lot of time with Ross Gelbspan, who wrote, people may not know who he is, but look him up. He was the editor of the Boston Globe editorial page, and he wrote a series about climate change, I think in 2005, and it freaked him out, and he wrote a book about it, wrote a couple of books on it. And he lives in Brookline in Massachusetts, and I was living in Massachusetts at the time, and used to go over to his kitchen and he'd feed me coffee and listen. Because there just weren't all that many people that you could talk to. So I feel personally better because it's not alone, but then the state of things is so much worse.
It is.
That it just, it continues to add on new layers of making it, I don't know about you, but most people I know are always existing now in a tension between the desperate need to try to do what we can, and a sense of, and as you said, a sense of despair that makes it difficult to do anything on any given day. That seems to me to be the experience of most people that I know that aren't buffering themselves in some way. Like if you buffer yourself, then it's easier to just get up and do what's in front of you. If you don't buffer yourself, then it's much more, then you get up and go, well, this is inconsequential. I mean, this is not nearly big enough. So it's that personal struggle is just really tough.
It is. I do it every day. I mean, I run this page and then I do interviews, and I've been down this rabbit hole for now a long time. I have thought of myself as the environmentalist, but it's so much more than that, because I am awake and I am down the rabbit hole. I know. And I speak with people and scientists all over the world, and this is my way of mitigation, I guess, is being able to bring and educate people that may not understand. And without, I don't want to be an alarmist. We're almost at a post-alarmist stage. This is not to alarm. This is to educate. Everybody needs to take a personal responsibility, wouldn't you say? Yes.
It's, and I appreciate that. We didn't have such means of communication, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So it's really, very appreciative of that. Is one of the reasons why we're feeling like we're getting to I forget what it's called in economic terms, but some kind of minimum scale to be able to do anything. You have to have some minimal number of people and minimal number of resources and capacity before you can have any hope to really communicate. And in our case, we're trying to communicate not just against the naysayers or the deniers, but against the moderates who are saying, yeah, it's a problem, but we're working on it.
Right. With the
every time I see a press release that goes, look how much more solar we have this year. When you actually then compare that, it's like, oh, well, great. Now we're up to 3%. It's just utterly insufficient to what we need. So that's harder to deal with in my experience. I mean, you need some amount of resources and capacity to be able to contest the moderate, perspective, which is just denial of a different kind.
And it is it's a conundrum here. You're right. This denial is, and I speak about this quite often, the denial, but there's the different kind of denial. There's the denial of the climate deniers, or so to speak, those people like, I don't know if you're familiar with Norman Rogers or Robert Rogers from American Thinker, those people that will do everything to dispel all of the science that we know. And then there are people like most of my friends who understand that something's going on, but have no clue about what's going to happen when the Arctic ice goes. What's going to happen? Have you been up there? Have you done any traveling like that?
No, unfortunately, I would like to, but I don't have any resources. So,
Yeah.
for most of the last, whatever it's been now, 15 years, I was working as a carpenter as a day job to be able to afford to do this. And only recently, with three other friends, Tim DeChristopher, Jay O'Hara, and Marla Markham, we founded something called the Climate Disobedience Center a couple of years ago.
Yes, let's get into that.
Just gotten to the point where we're in a position to give us a stipend for some of us to be able to do this full time. So I really appreciate that, being able to do that.
So let's get into where you started this, because most people understand and know you as the person that went and turned off the valves, and there are differing opinions that, oh my God, I'm not sure that was good. How did he know it wasn't going to blow up? There's that, and then there are those, yes, and I have a lot of people that are pretty excited about this. So why don't we go into this whole story, because I would like to hear it, actually. Right.
Well, after I wrote the Bright Lines papers, and the purpose of that was to try to foment a debate inside the major organizations. We were proposing. We had about 200 people engaged in that effort, so it was an interesting approach. But the thing we were actually asking to do was to essentially do what the right wing, I think, does very well, which was we'd proposed, why don't we set up a kind of an activist think tank, which we'll call the Bright Lines Institute, and it'll be a place where we write, think, challenge conventional assumptions, try out different kinds of campaigning, and then we weren't able to raise any money. Now, I was very surprised because I've raised millions of dollars in my professional life. I didn't think it would be that hard. It was the first time I really started to try to understand what was going on in terms of the organizational resistance and personal denial, because it didn't seem like it was it seemed like a good idea to me. Like, we're not asking everybody to drop everything tomorrow, but let's try this, let's create a creative, on the edge, place. So after that failed, I then I just took pieces of the strategy that we proposed, the Bright Line strategy, and I just took them one at a time and tried to make each of them work. So I spent a couple of years doing sort of sustainability work. I was the executive director of the Apron Institute for Sustainable Living in Rhode Island for a while to try that. I did a project called the Jamaica Plain Greenhouse in Boston.
Oh, I read about that.
Where with my then partner Andre Zaleska, we bought an abandoned old neighborhood house and we rebuilt it, aiming for passive house status, but doing it on our own, low income, without large sums of money, or just showing that you could do this even if you're nearly poor. And then I was one of the people that launched 350 in New England. The JP Greenhouse was served as the hub for 350 organizing throughout New England and in Massachusetts. So we did various 350 kinds of approaches. And then finally, I just got to the point where, after having written about it and spoken about it for a while, calling for more dramatic climate direct action that would really serve to create powerful points of moral conflict. I didn't think we were doing that in a way that I know that people have in the past, Greenpeace in particular. Yeah, we just weren't doing that. We were doing big rallies, but So I decided, well, I guess I'll have to go do one myself. Then it was a difficult decision, partly because I'm a dad, and then I knew that the risks were going to be high. But my friend Jay O'Hara, who's at the time was a Quaker sailmaker living on Cape Cod, and I decided that we would shut the Brayton Point power plant in Somerset, which we looked to see what was the largest carbon emission source in the Northeast, and it was at the time Brayton Power Point plant. So that's why we went there. And then I spent like a couple months researching the plant and looking at it. I spent about a month pretending to be a bird watcher, sitting on the beach across from the power plant itself with my dad's Audubon book and binoculars, in case anybody asked me what I was doing there. And we figured out that we could do it. We figured out we thought we could do it. And I bought a lobster boat, an old lobster boat, and Jay and I went out in May of, I guess it was 2013 at this point, and we had fabricated a giant anchor that was attached to the keel of the boat. And we knew when the coal ships, and the coal ships, by the way, are coming from, it's all Appalachian mountaintop removed coal. The plant was burning. So they were coming up from Hampton Roads. And you can track it online, which is pretty cool. So we waited till the ship was pretty close to the plant and went in front of it and dropped the anchor, talked to the ship's captain and talked to the police and said, we're trying to shut down the plant here. Actually, the police said, "Oh, you're conducting a protest? Well, that shouldn't be a problem as long as you don't get in the way."
As long as you don't get in the way.
As a matter of fact, we are in the way. So that was pretty fascinating. We closed it.
I remember.
We weren't able to unload for the day. The Coast Guard had a little bit of an internal debate of what to do with us because we hadn't actually violated any nautical rules. We were legally anchored. Eventually, they said they were going to fine us if we didn't leave, and we were new at the game. Actually, we had gone there anticipating, arrest, anticipating potentially a jail term, but we hadn't gone there with the idea of what do you do when you're threatened with a $40,000 fine.
The civil disobedience fine.
I just didn't. I would say that was the amount of money that I barely managed to raise for my kids' college fund, and I was like, so anyway, we left. The Coast Guard actually fined us $2,000, but that wasn't enough for the town, the Somerset, and they brought 4 additional charges. We went to trial. 3 years ago now in the fall.
Yeah, I remember.
We were allowed what's called a necessity defense. So we had Bill McKibben and Jim Hansen and 2 other co-authors of IPCC reports in motels ready to testify. We were psyched. We had 200 people there. We had 50 Quakers in silent meeting beforehand. We went into court, and then the prosecutor, a guy named Sam Sutter, who we'd never met before, came in. He asked to speak to us, and he said, I agree with you. I want to drop all the charges, drop all the criminal charges.
Oh, my God.
We said, would you be willing to say that, in public? And he was like, oh, do you want me to? We said, yeah. So he came out, and he stood on the steps of the state of the courthouse, and he said, I agree with these guys. I think the political system has failed to address climate change. He held up a copy of Rolling Stone that had Bill McKibben's article, Do the Math, in it. He said, I read it this weekend. I agree with this. I'm using my prosecutorial discretion to drop all criminal charges. And I'm going to go march with these guys in New York at the People's Climate March later this month, which he did. He came down with his family and his staff, and we all marched, up and down the Central Park West.
That was unexpected, wasn't it?
It was highly unexpected.
Yeah, highly
unexpected. Lots of people have told me it's given me an unnecessarily Pollyannish view of the legal system and how things might play out. But
well,
anyway, that was the start.
That one it played out like that. But then, where did we go from there?
Well, I don't know. I did a little accounting of this. I've done a fair amount of this in the last 4 years, and I haven't actually, had significant consequences yet. I'll emphasize yet.
And we will go for some questions about that.
I moved to Oregon for personal, family type reasons. Out here, I was engaged in the effort to block the Fenica for the Shell No, which is the kayaktivism in the harbors in Seattle. And then later that same summer, the Shell's icebreaker, the Fenica, had to come for repairs in Portland. And with a couple friends of mine, went out in a dory and tried to block that. which didn't work because our boat was too small, I think.
What were they going to run you over?
They just picked us up and moved us out of the way, which they couldn't do with the lobster boat. So we just need a bigger. The lesson is definitely you need a bigger boat. People have sent me all that misaligned jaws.
You need the big Greenpeace boat.
Yeah, that's what we do need. We need a boat like that. If we had,
well, let's do an GoFundMe.
If we had the resources, we really ought to have Greenpeace level of resources, given that the world is at stake here, right? We should be able to buy Greenpeace-sized boats and put them in the way. And the fact that we can't do that, the fact that the best I could do, having done the lobster boat, the best I could do was to buy a 14-foot dory when we needed, more like a 40-foot, that's our resource problem here. So,
maybe we'll come to where something like that will be able to happen. I mean, we're having discussions now, and people even more are waking up. I mean, I would hope that we can get something out there. I really do, because I think you're brilliant, and we will have some questions, because I know one of my friends, Pete, is dying to ask you a question. But wait, Pete, because I want to get up to where we led up to.
Oh, okay. Well, after the show, after show, I was involved last summer in the Break Free, which is 350 and others, the Break Free international effort. With 52 close friends now, we blocked the railroad tracks in front of 2 refineries in Anacortes, for which I was actually I think it was the first time I was arrested and charged with trespass. And after that, we thought none of these things are quite yet getting to the level of that kind of point of moral conflict. We knew about the efforts of some people in Canada who had shut down 3 pipelines in Canada by closing the block valves. We got in contact with them. We also watched, because they put up on YouTube what they had done, and we decided to do the same thing. We were initially going to do it on just one pipeline, but we realized we both had enough people and also had done enough research. We concluded that we could shut down all pipelines carrying tar sands oil from Canada into the U.S. That's what we did in October of last year. 5 of us, with several supporters and with a number of independent videographers, went to 4 locations across the northern tier of the country, and in a couple-hour period, we shut down all 5 pipelines carrying tar sands oil into the U.S.
Did you ever think, though, that this could have a ramification that could be like blowing something up, or
we were.
I mean, what happened? What was the response you were going to have if there was some kind of catastrophic oil event?
I think we would not have. We spent a lot of time looking at this, and we spent a lot of time researching it. A lot of that is available you can do it online. We actually had one of our group took a pipeline safety course. We talked to experts in the field. We talked to experts in pipeline safety and inspection. So we were pretty, and we were unwilling to do it if we weren't pretty comfortable that it was going to be safe. I think the fact that, and then we did it in such a way as to make it even safer, so that we called each pipeline company before we did this. We gave them adequate notice for them to take the measures that they could do from their command center. We had our own command center where somebody made an independent phone call just to make sure that the calls were made. We had carefully researched the specific sites that we went to. We knew exactly what we were looking for. We knew what the safety valves did. And I think the fact that we, successfully shut down 5 major pipelines without any problem anywhere, on top of the experience in Canada, there has been no problem in any of these, is a pretty good indicator that we knew what we were doing. And that the equipment that we are using is designed for that purpose. It's important. People don't necessarily know this, but the purpose of the block files, the things that we actually turned, is to allow people on the ground, if there is an emergency, like if the command center gets cut off electronically from the pipeline and there's a problem, then there has to be some way to deal with it, and that's the purpose of these block valves. And then having done all that, we still had to come to a existential political moment where we say, but there still is, it's, you know, you can't do something like this without there being some risk. And we just said, yeah, but the risk of continuing to burn this stuff is huge too. So, you know, we're at the point where we have, it's not like we're choosing to do these risks. It's because we've tried every available legal means and not one of them is working. The only reason, we're in a desperate position. And therefore, it seemed to us to be a reasonable risk worth taking.
Well, it seemed to wake people up, because I remember watching, well, I knew who you were before that, but I remember watching this, and there was a lot of talk about it last year. So tell me something. When you actually did it, and how long did it take for the authorities to get there? You filmed it, so.
We filmed it in sort of two different ways. We live streamed it. I had a iPhone attached to my chest, and that was that was actually a safety measure, sort of two levels of safety. One was our personal safety, because we weren't really sure what the law enforcement response was going to be, especially in places like North Dakota. So that was a safety measure, but it was also a safety measure for the shutdown, because in one of the cases in Canada where people called up to say, we're going to shut the thing down, the people in the control room said, essentially, we don't believe you, or prove it.
Wow.
So we thought, well, we'll live stream everything so that if anybody asks us, we can say, well, you can go to our Facebook page and see that we in fact are right there. So that was one of the reasons why we did it. It was variable, to answer the question. It was, I did it in Burlington, which is a couple of miles from the sheriff's department in Skagit County. So they were there within less than 10 minutes. I believe that Leonard Higgins in Montana had to wait nearly 2 hours before anybody showed up to arrest him. So it is one of the things we certainly point to in jury trials to show that we are not trying to evade any responsibility for what we're doing, because we stood around and waited.
Yeah. And that was very clear. That was very clear at the time, and it was clear when you went to court, and it was clear when you asked for the necessary defense. It was clear. This was to wake people up, and it did. I mean, I remember last year we were all talking about it, at least when I was with a different group. It was I was with a different group last year, an online political group, and it was all the buzz. And my friend is with me. He's making comments. He just said perhaps this was the single most important pipeline direct action ever.
Thank you, Pete.
Ever.
Pete, because you do these things, and we're not like we're certainly in a different media environment than we used to be in. I mean, the lobster boat blockade was covered in the LA Times and the New York Times. This action was covered by no major national media. The biggest coverage we got was like Democracy Now!, and Reuters. And the Guardian, which is not to denigrate any of those places, but it's preaching to the choir. Yeah, we're not. We didn't get. So we also don't necessarily always know, that people noticed. So it's always good to hear.
Yeah. Well, so then it came. They arrested you, and were you scared?
Not at that point. I was scared before I did it. I think this is the experience. Most of us talk about it in varying kinds of ways. We had, so there was worries, all kinds of worries, like as I was doing it, like, is there going to be a problem? Can I do it? Can I actually cut the chains? Will it? I mean, I was going like, this will be really embarrassing if everybody else manages to do it and we do 4 out of 5 and I can't cut the chain because it was hard. So, all of us had that, but it was actually done. No, then I found an immense sense of relief. And
And we were all cheering.
Yeah, like, okay, we did it. The stuff will happen from here. And certainly things happened. I mean, we did not, we anticipated a more significant law enforcement response than we ordinarily see in most pipeline or, railroad blockades. We knew that this was going to be harsher, but we didn't anticipate really the level of response. So when I was first looking at I was facing four charges that added up to 30 some odd years, nearly, I think, $30,000, $32,000 in potential fines.
Right.
I had an extremely high bail. It was $75,000. So we had to come up with $7,500 to just bail me out.
Who did? Who came up with it?
My girlfriend paid it, and I paid her back. But actually, she called me up when I was inside. She called me up, and she's like, "I'm going to pay the bail." And I was like, "I don't know. Maybe I should just stay in here." And she said, "This is not a matter of debate. I'm paying the bail." And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah, okay. Is she the person that I saw in the film clip?
Probably, yes, Laura.
Yes. And she talked about loving an activist like you. And that was a nice clip. It was touching. I can't wait to see the movie. So let's go on to the whole litigation and the necessary defense. And I found it pretty fascinating. I'm not a lawyer, but it's just...
Yeah, me neither. It was all new to me, except for in theory. Yeah. But yes, all of us knew from the beginning going in that we wanted to go through the whole legal process. We wanted to go to trial. We wanted to offer a necessity defense to see if we could. The necessity defense, for anybody that's listening, is it's a part of the law that just says that sometimes it's okay to break a specific law if you were doing so in order to avoid a bigger harm. So we wanted to be able to argue that. The judge in my case didn't allow it. So I had to go to trial. I've been to trial twice now. The first trial was at the end of January. 2 of the charges were dropped because they also had brought charges against the independent videographer who had been the 2 videographers who were filming. And when they dropped charges against them, because they didn't do anything, they had to drop 2 of the charges against me because they were predicated on, one of the charges was actually our favorite charge, assemblage of saboteurs. But when they dropped the charges against the other folks, they didn't have an assemblage, so they had to drop that. So anyway, went to trial on 2 charges without being able to offer necessity defense. That means that I wasn't able to put climate scientists, and again, we had Jim Hansen and others who were prepared to go onto the stand.
And that's the part that's really frustrating because that could have been a more media-worthy it
would have been a much, much more interesting trial because the press from the prosecution side, we provided the prosecutor with a 7-minute video of me doing exactly what they were charging me with. So there wasn't really a question of fact. And also on the stand, I testified to what I did. So on most trials are about the facts, right? So this was no question of fact. The only question was, on my end, being able to testify a little bit. The judge gave me some leeway to talk about climate science and what the impacts were likely to be on Skagit County. I had a map showing what Skagit County would look like or will look like with 5 feet of sea level rise, and about a quarter of the county, including all the agricultural lands, are underwater. So I was
How far able to from the ocean? How far is that county from?
Skagit County is on the ocean.
It is.
Right there. So, and in the first trial, it was a hung jury on both charges. They brought the charges again, and now 2 weeks ago, there was a hung jury on one charge, the greater charge of sabotage, and I was convicted on burglary, the lesser of the charges. And then last week, I was sentenced, and I was sentenced to 32 days. 2 of which were for time served when I was arrested in jail, and 30 days to be completed by doing community service in Skagit County.
Okay.
And no fine, some fees and no fine, which is a pretty light it's extremely light sentence.
It is.
So
It
compared
is,
to what
because
could have
that
been,
was a
the
pretty heavy
prosecutor asked
duty.
for 90 days in jail, and the company itself declined to ask for restitution. They could have come in and asked for a lot of money for that, and they've opted not
Yeah,
to
they
do
sure
so.
could have. Maybe they have a little tinge of guilt.
I don't think so.
No,
Our best
I
guess
doubt
is
it.
that if they
I don't
had
think
done that,
so.
we would have been able to depose them and put their folks on
Ooh.
the stand and ask them questions about money, and they may have wanted to avoid that. So
Yeah, that sounds
that's just speculation.
unreasonable. Yeah. Well, Pete's got a
So we are appealing. So
oh,
I'm appealing,
mm-hmm.
even though if we win on an appeal, it means I might have to go back and do a third trial on both charges. But the appeal is on the basis that we weren't allowed a necessity defense. So that'll take a while. There's actually a court hearing tomorrow to find out whether my sentence is stayed while we're on appeal. So we'll find out about that. Otherwise, I'll be up in Skagit County doing something. And we also have trials of the 4 other valve turners, 3 other supporters, and 1 videographer. They're still going to trial over the next several months. That's what we're going to do.
Quite a process.
Yeah.
Well, I want to bring up a question by Pete, because Pete Perry is a huge activist and he's done a lot of civil disobedience. And his question, and hi Pete, is do you have any plans for a massive direct action in around climate change this summer or this fall? And if you do, can you tell us?
Well, we're certainly in kind of conversations and planning for where we go from here. Personally, I'm not going to be able to do much for the 6 months of court supervised probation, and that will certainly limit the things I'm able to do personally. But it doesn't limit my ability to travel, talk, train, or engage. And there's a lot of things happening out there that we're trying to. I'm dancing around, going like, we'll be announcing stuff shortly.
Yeah, but you know what?
Not necessarily DC.
This cannot end. We are in such a critical time now with 45 in the administration that you guys got to be ramping up. We have to get people to join you. We have to get this video out. We have to get the word out. We need to make this bigger, I think.
Yeah, it would be good.
I do.
Yes.
I think. But you know what the sticky part is, why aren't the NGO, why aren't those big organizations helping you? What is the goddamn problem? They've got all the money. I don't know. It's frustrating because, you get all the emails about let's save all of the gorillas. Well, where are we going to save them to live if we don't have a place for them to live?
Good question. Yeah, no, so I'm going to, I'm certainly going to spend, and you mentioned this earlier, but I've already given some thought that it seems like this might be a good time to do an updated kind of version of a Bright Lines papers and some videos, like laying out an alternative strategy, but also laying out the argument for why a first step, my personal view is that a first step is that we need to have control of our own institution. If by we, I mean environmentalists and climate activists. If we can't even change our own institution, why would we expect anybody else to change? I mean, that seems to me like an elemental first step. It's not easy to do, but on the other hand, we really are in a position where the climate strategy devised by our major organizations and followed for 20 years has been an utter, total, abject failure.
Yeah, well, look at where we are.
Yeah, so it seems like
that are melting, the Arctic is melting.
Perhaps requires some kind of internal conversation or debate. I mean, we're seeing, for all that it's not, maybe not ending where we want it to, there is a pretty vigorous debate inside the Democratic Party of how do we deal with this incredible, failure. There is no similar internal debate in the environmental movement, and there ought to be. So I'm interested in trying to foment that, along with, my view is that doing things like Shut It Down and the Lobster Boat are merely trying, for me personally, we're, among other things, trying to show examples of here's another way we could be doing these things. But I also think we need to try to enjoin and engage that kind of central debate.
I couldn't agree with you more. And you know what? I think that with something to wake up the masses, right? I didn't spell it right, but wake up the masses. Well, we could. And, you know, with that, maybe it isn't with the big ones. Maybe they're just not it. Maybe it's through little grassroots efforts like today, this interview, sharing it, getting people interested like Pete, who is the consummate activist, talking, and he talks to his friends and other people talk to other people, and then they get in touch with you. Look at the water protector movement that came out of Standing Rock. Yeah. Well, join in with this. I mean, this is a natural to join together.
Yeah.
I mean, without a climate, what are we going to protect water for?
We actually did. I mean, our action was done. Was done on climate, but the timing of it was done in response to the call from Standing Rock for a week of action and prayer. That's why we did it, and that's how we spoke about it. And so we have a lot of friends. You know, it's because we did it in that way, it's occasioned a nice conversation. So I agree. I think all of that needs to be happening. I'm just saying personally, because I came out of this professionally staffed mainstream environmental movement, I feel like it's my responsibility to continue to hammer away at my friends there, saying, "What the hell are you doing? This isn't working. We need to do other things." And there's a range. It's not just. I certainly don't think that climate direct action, like shut it down, is the only thing we should be doing. I think mass-based action is hugely important, but I also think that things like the Children's Atmospheric Trust litigation, which is, I just saw we're going to trial in February.
That's like amazing.
That's amazing. I think the CELDF effort to do local organizing, especially in Western Pennsylvania and Colorado and in Ohio, with passing ordinances that give local municipalities control over the ability to oppose using civil disobedience to enforce their own ordinances against eminent domain for fracking wells and pipelines. I think those are all very powerful, different, creative, and strategic and structural changes, and we need to engage in all of them.
Well, we just did that here, and we beat the Northern Access Pipeline, but unfortunately the gas company is still, because FERC rubber stamped the eminent domain, the gas company, and I'll say it, National Fuel Gas, is taking the landowners and some local judges sided with FERC and granted the company eminent domain, even though they didn't get the water quality permits. So tell me, I won't insinuate anything about those local judges, but I don't think anything. I think it stinks, and we still have people going to court in Erie County, New York, for this eminent domain, and this National Fuel Gas is going to try to do this, ram this pipeline up our behinds, and truthfully, it's for pure profit. I don't know if you heard about the Northern Access. It goes from Pennsylvania, comes all the way through our beautiful property in Western New York, all the way through. They want to go underneath, build compressor stations, go underneath the Niagara River, which has an incredible current, to Canada for 80% profit. Nothing's for us. And I've done live streams on this. I mean, I've covered this a lot, but I don't think we'll be dropping it, obviously, even though we said we won. We didn't win. They're going to try to slime this through. So tell me, are you involved in it, or know any, our pipeline? I mean, obviously that was a pipeline thing, but is there anything coming up for you?
I was just did a tour with CELDF to pipeline and fracking battles in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Ending up at the Lancaster fight against the Sunrise pipeline. Spent a couple of days there, and we had events in those places. I went to Grant Township, and then a couple of efforts around Cleveland. So
good for you.
I'm personally also interested in the effort in Coos Bay, the pipeline to Coos Bay out here. So
Tell me
there's a
about
lot of
that.
fights happening all
I
over
don't
the
know
place.
about the Coos Bay one in Oregon. Tell
Oh,
me
it's
about
a
that one.
major natural LNG pipeline going through Oregon to Coos Bay and to an export, and it's the biggest fight right now in Oregon. There
Why don't I
are
know about this? Oh my
oh,
God.
I can send you stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
you're
big
going to. Jeff
yeah.
is on the screen. Jeff lives in Oregon. Jeff, are you still with us? My God. I didn't
So
even know about it. Or if I did, it's been back in the back of my head because I have
yeah.
so many other things
Well,
going on.
there are so many of these
So
efforts around
many.
here, right? I mean, we're uh, and I don't personally think we can win. I mean, the the fights against specific expansion proposals are obviously crucial to the people who live there. As
Mm-hmm.
as a strategy for defeating climate change, it's only one part. It can only
I
be
know.
one part.
That is one piece.
So we're going to win some. Well, we've actually won a lot in the Pacific Northwest, and we're going to lose a lot of them. But that doesn't mean that it's not important that we are fighting everywhere as vigorously
Mm-hmm.
as we can. I thought those of us that did the shut it down effort thought. Well, actually, we were trying to think a little bit like guerrilla fighters, right? So if you're in a situation, and we were in part trying to think, how could we be helpful to Standing Rock? So if you're in a situation where all you're doing is fighting new proposals, then you are, geographically tied down to where those efforts are. You're also only fighting new expansions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we thought it's important that we also open fronts where we can choose where the fight is going to be. So in a guerrilla-minded way, that means we can go to where we want to go.
Right.
We can hit companies where they're least expecting it, and they don't know
What the
about it
water
like they do.
protectors are doing. The camps, the water protectors that are setting up camps all over, and these young people are, they are, the majority are young people, are amazing.
Absolutely,
Amazing.
yeah.
Like Chelsea Lyons Kent and just amazing people. How do
Yep.
you feel about that movement?
I think it's great. I was at Standing Rock for only a couple of days early on. I think it's because it's a new movement and because it is bringing together, especially in Standing Rock, where you've got a whole history of oppression and also political questions between tribes. That the coming together at Standing Rock was such an immense positive, overwhelmingly positive personal experience that once it's broken up, it's tough. It's tough to figure out how to keep going. It's tough to figure out in these smaller encampments how to recreate that sense of of fellowship and love that was so evident there.
I believe there's difficulty in
But
that.
still, the spark is there. The knowledge that is So I think that it's important to launch efforts that are on existing infrastructure as well as new infrastructure. That's why we did shut it down. So I'm hoping that we'll see more of that.
You know, the one I mentioned, CPV. It is a hideous gas plant in Minisink, New York, and it was like this backroom deal with our Governor Cuomo, and they were just shocked that they put it where they put it, and it's like they're going to build this thing, and it is hideous, and they're going to put it. It's going to tie us to this fracked gas. Bless you, for another 40, 50 years, but. Do we have another 40, 50 years?
Well, apparently we have 3.
Yeah, well, we could segue into that. Tell me about are you familiar? Of course you are, with Dr. Guy McPherson.
Yes.
And who do you follow in that movement? Who do you follow in the near-term human extinction, abrupt climate change? Who do you follow?
I generally just stick with what Jim Hansen says, except for where I think he's having to be too conservative. So, I think Hansen's, consensus assessment of the science is reasonable to stick with, but I don't agree with his, with his solutions, because I don't think they're a big enough scale. I also don't think that they're politically what we should be calling for. But it doesn't, at some level, matter too much. I mean, if I I think that the conditions under which my son is going to be, he's 17, that he's going to be living his life, are likely to be quite miserable, and get worse, and, you know, with no expectation that they'll get better. And that's the main thing. That's what we are facing. The question is, can we mitigate it somewhat so that it's not totally catastrophic?
Well, those are the things that, you know, I try to tell people, and there's so many people that don't want to listen. And I think, how do I prepare my own house? How do we prepare? I mean, we grow our vegetables. We are somewhat self-sufficient, but no, we're not. I mean, we don't have solar panels yet. We don't have a means to heat our house other than wood. Then we'd have to take down every tree in the yard. I mean, there's a lot of thinking that goes into it. Is it too little, too late? And I don't want to be depressing.
I think it's a good thing. It's obviously good. I think it's good. I think that people, I mean, I'm surrounded by people in Oregon who have all of those things, right? And they're going like, we're going to be able to survive. And I'm like, well, you know, part of the problem with climate change is you're going to have all of California camped on your doorstep here. So,
like New York City's going to be camped on my doorstep.
You know, I mean, it's not like we're just going to be left alone in our little eco paradises here either. So. That doesn't seem to me to be. Named,
what is his name? David Casey, who wrote to me, and he has this whole training. It's learning how to use firearms and training and all this, so you can protect yourself when this all happens. And it's a little radical. It's a little radical for me to think about, but the reality is, when people are not able to, if it indeed happens like this, are not able to get food, not able to get, you know, what they need, their basic supplies to live, you know, but I'm not gonna push that issue right now. Yeah. We have to push the issue of the activism that you have shown and that you are still showing, and you have great promise to continue, I feel.
Well, not for 6 months. After that, we'll see.
Okay. Now, I know, yes, I mean, the different scientists say different things, and yes, I understand. But, you know, Ken, does anybody have any questions? I think this has been really helpful and really good.
Thank you.
You are an amazing activist, amazing person, because you've been through 40 years of this. And unfortunately, the political climates have never been amenable to say, hey, we have to take this seriously. Never. Even Barack Obama, you know, what happened?
Marcellus and Utica Shale. In this one area, I do believe that there is always reason because I believe in a history of abrupt political change. I think when change on this happens, it's going to be very quick. So I think that the things that we're doing now may seem ineffectual. We might lose here and there, but the reality is not changed. And when we look at how, you know, broad political change has happened very quickly, I think that is what we're facing. And I think there's reason for hope. Yeah. Yes,
2018, get these climate deniers out, and everybody has to think about the fact that we really have to take this all seriously, and not just, you know, it doesn't mean we have to be alarmist. It doesn't mean we have to live in fear. It means we have to take action. Basically, that's what it is. And I'm here to educate.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining Environmental Coffee House. This has been really, really great. I have so appreciated this. And in 6 months, when you're ready to embark on your next journey, you come back and you tell us about it.
I would love to. That would be great.
We would love to have you. Okay, well, everybody's saying thank you. So I will
thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Saying thank you. Good night. Good night. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Peace.